Nassau Street, Troy, New York, and C.B. Bryce Draper and I spent a lot of time together, many happy hours in the Navy. I'll attempt to recap everything of his naval career, which is really my naval career. And it certainly has always been an important part of my life. And the wonderful part was, as I will talk about later, Bryce and Lucy were able to come east in 1968 on a trip and brought their family, and they stayed with us. At that time we lived about 4 or 5 blocks away from here at 21 South Lake Avenue in Troy. Soon after, and in fact Lucy and Bryce saw our land that we had here, we built this house, because with 5 children we were quickly running out of bedroom space. But I guess I've said enough about that. The first thing to remember is that back in World War II, both of us, Bryce and myself, were in high school and graduated in June of 1944. And in order to get in the Navy, it meant, I'm sure it was in Bryce's case as well as mine, that we were already signed up when we were in high school. We had enlisted in the Navy, and they were interested in you finishing up and getting your diploma. So our story really begins for both of us when we went to 2 different Navy boot camps. In my case, I left in late June 1944 and went out to central New York State to Sampson Naval Training Base. Admiral Sampson was some famous admiral, I guess, of the Spanish-American War, if memory serves me correctly. And all it was like a big Army camp or big Navy camp with lots of barracks and different units, as they were called. And probably at any one time, they were probably training, say 20,000 recruits. And they kept you there for a 12-week period in order to physically toughen you up, give you all the medical shots you'd need, the dental care that perhaps you'd need, and training in drilling and stuff like that. And so there we were, 17-year-old guys just out of high school. It was pretty impressive to us, and it actually wasn't a bad way to spend the summer. Now, as they say, Sampson Naval Base, if you were ever interested, is just south of Syracuse, New York. That's the biggest main city on Seneca Lake. At the top of the lake was a little town called Geneva, New York, which is a pretty little place. But we only got there once in our 12 weeks. They let us go up for a day's outing after we had done particularly good on inspections of our barracks. Now, what I'm telling you is probably identical to the situation that Bryce went through, because he, I believe, was up at Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I'm quite sure he told me that that was the spot where all of the boots went from the western states. And if so, it was really quite spectacular country. So he was north of Utah, a few hundred miles, and I was west of where I lived in New York State, 150 so miles. But that's where the story really begins. And next I'll have to just tell you about how we got together. During boot camp, I should say this, during boot camp, they continuously tested the recruits to see what their aptitude was. For instance, if you seem to be able to pick up Morse code easily, you obviously were going to be in the radio shack of a ship. If you had no aptitudes, then you probably wound up in the deck gang chipping paint on a ship all day. But luckily that didn't happen to either Bryce or myself. We were very lucky. In my case, I got into fire control as he did. And when they said to me, "You're going to be in fire control," I thought to myself, well, I'm no fireman, and I don't really like to fight fires. But that's not what it was. It was really the aiming and the firing of the guns on the ship. And so anyway, all we knew, though, at this time in September of 1944 was that after we had gotten through our boot camp, that we were going to go to fire control school in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Well, as they say, that appealed to us because the winter was coming on, and of course it was probably Bryce's first trip across the country, and it was certainly my first trip going down to Florida. I'd never been there. So, this sounded pretty Jim Dandy to us. And that's where we met, is at Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And that was September of 1944. And the real reason we got there was fire controlmen had to have excellent eyesight, and both of us had it, so that we would be able to use what they call optical rangefinders, which are simply a super-duper set of binoculars, and with little diamonds etched on them, and you could determine the range of a target by looking into this rangefinder. But you still had to have very good eyesight, actually what they call stereoscopic vision, in order to qualify. And that simply means in stereoscopic vision, you could tell which object was closer than another. Maybe they're both a mile or 2 miles away, but you could look at them, and through your God-blessed eyesight, you could tell when you put a diamond, dialed in this diamond over the object, you'd know just how far it was away, because it would read out on a meter on the optical rangefinder. And of course, that's how you had to do if you were going to fire at an enemy ship or whatever the case may be. You'd have to know how far away things were. But anyway, we went to what's called Primary Fire Control School at Fort Lauderdale. And back at that time, Fort Lauderdale, Florida was just a sleepy little village, nowhere near as developed as it is today. There's probably, I would guess there's easily 20 or 30 times the people down there now as there were then. And they had a little sleepy old railroad station, simple white frame, and we got off there, and they took us by buses down what they call Las Olas Boulevard, right to the ocean. And lo and behold, there were our barracks, and it was tough duty. It was the Lauderdale Beach Hotel. Now, the Lauderdale Beach Hotel was, at that time, quite new. It probably was built in, I would say, no earlier than 1938, and was very modernistic looking, not by today's standards, but by those standards it was. And so that was our barracks, and it was right on the beach. And a lot of the beach wasn't developed. You'd be surprised where today you go down there, and it's just fabulous beachfront property. There was very little of that, except for this Lauderdale Beach Hotel. And so we stayed there, and because we were in school, believe it or not, they even had retained the cleaning help. We didn't even have to clean our rooms. That was pretty good duty. But right on the beach, they had these classrooms, and there they had optical range finders, and so that was, of course, what got us into it. But it turned out that we also had to learn there to use mechanical computers. They're really the forerunner of today's computers, and they would solve firing problems for guns. I mean, I don't think we really know anything more than how to operate them and get the answer. But they were mechanical computers that would take into consideration the wind and the distance and if the target was moving and you know, all sorts of factors that can affect aiming and firing of guns. Now, it was an excellent school, and I can't say enough even about all Navy training. I thought it was excellent. We also quickly found out, though, that the magic word that we first heard there was radar. And to that point, we hadn't even seen anything about it, knew nothing about it. But radar is really known as radio detection and ranging, and that's the short way they called it, radar. And with the radar, well, you could determine how far away a target was electronically, say within 5 yards, even if it was 20 miles away. You would know exactly what you just had to crank into your fire control computer in order to solve the problem of distance. And so we spent a lot of time on that, training on that. They'd have ships going up and down the coast, and they would know how far away they were, and we would have to try and make sure we could solve the problem, come up with the right answer. But it really was great. We were young and eager to learn, and it wasn't really that much beyond us. There wasn't much to do in Fort Lauderdale. We didn't have that much time off. I myself only remember taking a bus one time down to Miami. And Bryce, you may have been with me. I honestly can't remember that. There was a bunch of us. We went down to Miami and looked around. And of course, it was during the war. And one thing I really remember that irritates me is on Miami Beach, there was all of the vacationers. They hadn't taken over Miami Beach, and you'd never know there was a war on if you went there, because even the cars down there had like New York license plates or Illinois. At that time, New York City and Chicago were the main source of tourists to southern Florida. And a little bit disconcerting, though, to see these cars down there, because the gasoline was heavily rationed at the time, and that's when I guess you start to grow up a little and realize that money buys a few privileges. And it's a bit of a negative comment, I suppose, but that's the way it was. But anyway, what we did is we even got an opportunity while we were there to go out on our first sea voyage. It was only a day trip. It was on the USS Absecon. Now, the Absecon was a seaplane tender, and what it had on there is a catapult and a seaplane that they would shoot off the catapult and it would fly around, and then it would come down and land, and by means of a hook we would pull it out of the water again. And also the Absecon, and we were on it all day, that was a target ship for the Naval Air Forces down there who were training in torpedo planes. And it was interesting. The way it would work is that we'd go up and down the coast off of Fort Lauderdale and off of Port Everglades. We just went back and forth, maybe over a 20-mile span or so. And these torpedo planes would take off from their Florida bases in training and go out to sea and then come in toward the shore, toward us, as we were going parallel to the shore. And they would drop their dummy torpedoes, and then they had a group of people who were recording the hits on the ship. The torpedoes didn't actually hit the Absecon. What would happen is they set these dummy torpedoes so that they would run a little bit deeper and actually pass under the ship. But, you know, you could tell if it had been set, say, for 5 feet below the surface, it would have hit the side of the ship, and that's what they were practicing. And then, of course, the torpedoes themselves, they had some sort of a device, and they would pop up to the surface after they went under us, and they could be retrieved and used over and over again. So that's, in fact, President George Bush, who was a naval torpedo pilot, I remember once he talked about how he was down there at that time. Who knows? I may have been torpedoed by President Bush in a sort of facetious way. But anyway, it was our first taste of sea. You know, we thought we were pretty good sea dogs by now. We'd been out on that big ocean. I do remember just one other thing about it. Was the fact that here we were in Florida, and this time it was, say, November or December of 1944, and as you went along on the ocean, even off the coast of Florida, it was fairly cool at that time. I guess I expected it to be a little bit warmer and balmier, but it wasn't. And but anyway, it was just an interesting observation. Now, what we did is this is where Bryce and I met at this fire control school, and we were together until our discharge in June of 1946, after we put our ship in mothballs at Astoria, Oregon. Astoria, if you look on your map, you'll see is right at the mouth of the Columbia River, probably 150 miles down river from Portland, Oregon. It's a beautiful river. But anyway, that's where we first met, and from that day forward, we really stayed together. And actually, it was the first time I'd ever met a Mormon. And I was impressed, and so was everybody else from the East, because their language is certainly not salty, and they didn't drink tea, and they didn't drink coffee, they drank milk. Well, at first, I didn't know what to make of it, but then after about a week or so, hey, you realize these guys are for real and stand for something. And that was the end of, I mean, there was never any differences between us, but I think it was interesting for youngsters like myself to meet youngsters from another section of the country. I'm sure Bryce had the same feeling himself about the whole deal. But anyway, one of the names I can remember of people that came with Bryce is Mark Barret. It's B-A-R-R-E-T-T. And Mark was from Ogden, Utah. Later on, I will show you a picture on the video of Mark. And but I wasn't really particularly close to Mark, but he stayed with us, and he was on our ship too. And so anyway, what he did is I ran into Mark in Troy in 1991. I got a phone call, and it was Mark and his wife, of course, whom I didn't know. And so we had a lovely visit. He now lives in Colorado. I'm sorry to say I don't know exactly where, but if for any reason that you wanted to get a hold of him, I mean, that would be a way of doing it. Mark Barret, and he again was certainly one nice fellow, and so it was just after all those years to have someone come up to you and relive it for a few moments was pretty good. Well, anyway, what happened was in late January of 1945, we finished our training at Fort Lauderdale, and they sent us down to Miami to assemble us in a hotel. We were there for several days. The Everglades Hotel was the name of it. We saw a little bit of Miami then. And then they put us on a troop train that took us up to Little Creek, Virginia. Now, Little Creek, Virginia is right at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay and is a suburb of Norfolk, Virginia, where they have the gigantic naval base and still do, you know, building battleships, aircraft carriers, and the whole 9 yards. So we went to Little Creek, which was an amphibious base, and that was our first inkling of the type of ship we were going to be on. We knew we were going to be on one of the landing ships. And to be perfectly honest with you, I didn't know whether to be an LST or an LSM or what they call the LCI, Landing Craft Infantry. But anyway, for better, for worse, and it was a dump. It was a temporary, Little Creek was temporary from the first word go. I mean, the barracks were sort of old and drafty and, you know, had been thrown together. And I know my own recollection is, and it's probably Bryce's, we had been, all that summer, he had like been in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I'd been in the summer up in Sampson Naval Base. And then we were in Florida for most of the winter, and we were really used to the warm weather. We got up to Little Creek, Virginia, and we nearly perished with the cold. Oh boy, did we nearly perish with the cold. We were going around, we'd go around with 2 pairs of pants on, our long johns under that, our Navy coat, and under that our Navy sweater and our hats, and we'd be shivering. Of course, there wasn't really anything to do when we first went there. They just put us in barracks, and we were free to walk around the place, but we didn't have any duties. All we knew is that somehow or other we were going to get on an amphibious ship of some sort. Well, I guess we were there for about a week, and what happened was they posted us to Washington, D.C. Well, you know, this was manna from heaven to get out of Little Creek and go into a big city, and I had never been to Washington, and neither had Bryce. So we were going to Washington, D.C. to what they call the Advanced Fire Control School. And it really was advanced when we got there. We went, let's see, I'm just checking my notes here. We went up there in January, late January, and we were there until about late May of 1945. And that was quite a momentous period. But first, let me tell you about the school. It was a school where you not only learned to operate the equipment much better than we knew from our primary training, but you also learned how to repair it. They We had to have electric hydraulic drives on all these gun platforms, and that's where they showed us how to repair them, at least make, the repairs that we could at sea. And there were a lot of very smart guys, both teaching and guys that were there who, were taking the course with us. In fact, some of them had been overseas, mainly in Europe in the Navy, and they were being reassigned. At that time, they would pull off a lot of the, well, if you want to call them the older salts, who had some experience. They'd bring them back to form the nucleus of new crews, so that a new ship wouldn't be going out with, say, a total bunch of raw recruits the way Bryce and I were at the time. Well, anyhow, it was an excellent school, and quite a few things happened while we were there. In May of 1945 is when Germany surrendered. But also, to precede that, what I didn't say, which was very memorable, is that Franklin Roosevelt died in Warm Springs, Georgia. He died on April 12, 1945. They brought his body up on a special funeral train to Union Station in Washington on April the 14th, 1945. I'm very sure of those dates because April 14th was my birthday. And anyway, Roosevelt's death really came as a tremendous shock to the nation because there was such secrecy and well-kept secrecy that people didn't realize that Roosevelt was that sick. And, well, he was, and he died, so because we were at the Naval Fire Control School there, we were grabbed off, both Bryce, myself, and literally thousands of other sailors and Marines and Army guys from around the Washington area. We lined the streets all the way down from Union Station to the White House, where Roosevelt's body lay in state that day. Now, it was a cold April day, but sunny. And the streets were just mobbed, where we were lining up behind us, the crowds to watch the caisson go by, because what they did is they had the caisson go by with the horses drawing it from Union Station down to the White House. And I tell you, well, the best way for all younger people to remember it is you remember, many of you, and seen it on video, the tragedy of John Kennedy. And they did the same thing there. He was carried on a caisson down to Lyon State. And I tell you, people were crying their heads off behind us. We had a few tears in our own eyes. We were caught up in the emotion of the thing because, again, as I say, Roosevelt's death was, at least from the public's viewpoint, was totally unexpected. That's all I can say about it. So anyway, but it was a memorable moment. Going behind the big caisson in an open touring car, of course then they didn't worry about assassination so much, was then the new president, Harry Truman, with Eleanor Roosevelt. They were in the first car. And then in the second car, the open car, as I remember, were the members of the Roosevelt family. He had a number of sons, I believe 4, and one of them was married to Faye Emerson. Now, Faye Emerson was a pretty noted actress at the time, the blonde bombshells, if you will. And it was very interesting. There, Faye Emerson went by with the Roosevelt. And also, I remember General Marshall, of course, who was stationed in Washington. He was in one of the lead cars. There was General Marshall and General Hap Arnold. These are famous people. And as best I can recall, Admiral Nimitz was there, and Fleet Admiral King. But Admiral Nimitz, I especially mention that because he was the Pacific commander, but he must have just accidentally been in Washington at the time. And so, in so doing, he really, Nimitz, lent something to the occasion. But anyway, it was pretty heady stuff for Bryce and myself. Here we were only about 18 years old at the time, and so it's really a time in our life that we'll remember. But anyway, after Germany surrendered, we finished up school in May of 1945 because the Japanese War was still on, and again, we really felt that we were going to have to invade the Japanese home island. I mean, nobody thought that the Japanese, for a lot of people who may treat them with disdain, you've got to realize that they didn't control their own destiny. The people, it was their leaders. And so there were many of them that must have been very, very brave, just as there were Americans. And of course, just as a little sidebar to all this, I drive a Japanese car, and here we are, they got everything they needed without a war, and it does show the futility of war. But anyway, in May we finished up our schooling, and we were sent down to the naval base at Charleston, South Carolina. Now, Charleston was a big East Coast naval base, had a big shipyard, and that's where we joined our ship, which was known as the LSMR 503. LSMR stands for Landing Ship Medium Rocket. And that's what we were. We were a floating rocket dump, if you will. Had a lot of firepower. But anyway, that's where we picked up LSMR 503. We joined it there. The ship itself was built earlier that year in Houston, Texas, by the Brown Shipbuilding Company. And the crew sailed it on a shakedown voyage down the Houston Ship Canal and out around the coast of Florida and up to Charleston. It was at Charleston where a lot of the more secret equipment was put aboard, like the radars and the fire control equipment and some of the guns, and everything was tested there. That the Brown Shipbuilding Yard didn't have that capability. That's where we got, in a sense, our first glimpse of what war was all about, because I'll never forget, we were at a pier there, and in at another pier came this destroyer. And the name of it was the Rodman, R-O-D-M-A-N, the destroyer Rodman. And it had a hole blown in its bow that you could have driven a Greyhound bus through. Well, what it turned out was the Rodman had been hit by a kamikaze out in the Pacific. And so many, at that time, so many Navy ships were being devastated by these kamikazes that they would patch them up, the Navy ships. The ones that could make it through the Panama Canal and could sail that far were sent to East Coast facilities for repair, because both Pearl Harbor and all the West Coast Navy yards handled the serious cases that couldn't limp home that far. They wouldn't have made it, say, to the East Coast. So they had to send through the canal and up to Charleston, and I'm sure to Norfolk too, they were sending these kamikaze damaged ships. So at least we got first-hand information and a view of what war could be. But as they say, we stayed there at Charleston until about June 1st. And that's when we went up, we sailed up the coast, the east coast around Cape Hatteras, and where did we come back to? Where we had been before, Little Creek, Virginia. Again at the mouth of Chesapeake Bay, where it goes into the ocean. And Little Creek was sort of our training headquarters. Now the ship was ready. It was just a question of getting the crew to understand how to run everything and so on. So we would go out, and we did this for about a month or so. We would go out like on a Monday and come back on a Friday. They had a bombardment island called Bloodsworth Island. That's up in Chesapeake Bay, and it was a place where we practiced firing rockets, firing the guns, firing. We even had mortars on board the ship, and we would do all that. And so there was all sorts of practice like that. And so we got around Chesapeake Bay pretty good. And in fact, on one little cruise, we went up the James River near Norfolk. We went up the James River and anchored overnight right off of Jamestown. Now, Jamestown, Virginia, was the first English permanent settlement in America. It didn't mean much to me at the time, except I knew it was a little bit of history. Before I get off of this, I'd just like to say a word about that. If you ever get east and don't visit the Jamestown, Williamsburg area, you're missing much of what this country is all about. Especially Williamsburg, which has all been really reconstructed under the generous grants of the Rockefeller family. A lot of people may not like some of these millionaires, but believe me, the Rockefellers did a lot. And if you've never been to Williamsburg, it's to miss colonial history. We went back many years later with our children, and I just can't say enough about a visit to Williamsburg. It's truly living history. But anyway, at the time, we realized where we were to get back to the Navy again, and old LSMR 503 went back to Little Creek, Virginia. Now, about that time, what that was in July of 1945. And something unknown to us at that time was that an atomic device on about the 15th of July was detonated at Alamogordo, New Mexico. And they found it worked, of course, but we didn't know a thing about it. So at the end of July, it was around the 1st of August, we were ready for sea and got loaded up. They loaded us with ammunition right to the gunnels, and we were getting ready to head for the Pacific. Well, we left, as they say, I believe around the 1st of August. There was 6 ships, rocket ships as we call them, LSMRs, in our flotilla. There was LSMR 501, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And they had a command ship, which was a smaller ship, but to keep up with us, it was a landing craft infantry type of ship. And on there was, I guess what you'd call the captain or commodore of the flotilla. And he was the big boy. So altogether there were 7 of us ships, and so we cleared the mouth of Chesapeake Bay, and we were out about a day or so off the coast of Cape Hatteras, where frankly it was quite stormy the second time around. That's when we got our sea legs, or found out we didn't have the stomach for it. Some of us had it both ways. I don't know how Bryce made out, but I don't think I ate too much there for a while. But anyway, it was while we were going down there that over the Radio Shack they came through with the news about the atomic bomb being dropped on Hiroshima. And at that time, I think they said Hiroshima, makes no difference. But anyway, here we were, just kids, but boy, did we realize the impact of what it was. We weren't thinking of the fact that it was going to perhaps help end the war sooner. We thought to ourselves, hey, somebody could use that on us. As young as we were, that came to our mind. But anyway, there's not much we could do about it. We kept sailing south. We went by the Bahamas. In fact, we went by San Salvador Island, where they say Columbus first landed in this continent. And then we went through the Windward Passage. And the Windward Passage is between Cuba and Puerto Rico. And and of course, the Caribbean is truly just a blue, crystal clear ocean. It really is something to see, and that's where you see flying fish. Of course, when sailors would tell us about flying fish and we hadn't been out on the ocean, we'd sort of keep it to ourselves and wouldn't answer them back because we weren't sure whether they were pulling our legs or not. But the flying fish, they had like dragonfly wings on them. They had two on either side, and so that sometimes you'd get up in the morning and you'd find one on the deck because they'd be flying all night, skimming the ocean, and maybe they got a little too high and sailed right into the side of our ship and landed on the deck, and that was the end of them. So they really were the flying fish. But eventually, on August 15th, that was about 2 weeks, we were down to Panama, off the coast of Panama, and that's when the war actually ended. We were on the Atlantic side, waiting to get transited through. And we were there a couple of days because there was just so much traffic in the canal. And again, if you'll recall, I mentioned the destroyer Rodman. Well, we saw then coming out of the Panama Canal ships really just devastated by these kamikazes. They were being sent to East Coast for repairs. But anyway, they finally we got our turn and we went through the canal. As I recall, we went through in daylight, and it probably took something like 8 hours to get through it. But it was interesting, and so we were small ships, so they put 6 of us together. They tied 6 of us together and moved us through the canal that way. So it wasn't like we were a big battleship or ocean liner going through on your own. I'll give you an idea of the size of the ship. In fact, I don't think I've said anything about that. The ship was only about 125 feet long. It was about 40 feet wide. And we had a crew, as I recall, of about 120 men. Counting the officers, I'd say it was about 120 men. That's quite a few men for the size of the ship. But you needed them. If you were firing the rockets, you needed a lot of hands to lift the rockets onto racks, get them into position to fire, and so you had plenty of manpower. But anyway, we went through the canal, and then we went up the west coast of South or Central America and southern Mexico, and in fact, when we were within sight of the coast, and I recall we were able to use our optical rangefinder, which was like a super binoculars, we could look at the Acapulco, Mexico, which even back then, that was the big-time posh resort. There was a song by the name Acapulco at the time. I can't quite remember it, but it was in like the top 10 of songs, and they were playing that on the ship. So it was pretty good. And then we got to San Diego. And I'm just going to take a little moment's pause right here, and I'll start it again. Well, here we are again. And now I'll tell you about San Diego, because we did spend quite a bit of time on our ship in and around there. We got there around September 1st, 1945. And so it's certainly a beautiful bay. Being on the West Coast, maybe most of the Draper family has been down there for all I know. But it really, at that time, San Diego didn't have nearly the population it does today, but it was beautiful. It truly was a beautiful area. And the bay itself was just magnificent. You sailed in and sailed around into the bay, past what they call North Island Naval Air Station. And that was a naval air station back at the time when Lindbergh was flying the Atlantic. In fact, he took off with the Spirit of St. Louis from North Island and flew nonstop to St. Louis, Missouri on his way east to complete his flight to Paris. So that, anyway, this North Island Naval Air Station is just stupendous in size. And also, there was the Coronado Beach Hotel, which was old then. I guess it was built in the 1890s, and they've kept it up since then. I'd love to see it again someday. It was truly a magnificent site with more or less, I would call it Victorian architecture. But anyway, San Diego Bay was a big place, and it was also, they had a big Navy yard there. So we came into there, and so in the month of September, October, November, while we were there, all these ships were coming back from the Pacific now that the war was over. And they'd come in with their big homeward-bound pennants streaming off of their highest mast and so on. And I guess, again, it shows the futility of war, because I literally saw 100 destroyers alone, maybe 100 destroyer escorts, battleships, several battleships, aircraft carriers. They would tie up to North Island Naval Air Station docks. And just incredible, the amount of Navy ships. In fact, there were probably more Navy ships there by around Christmas time of 1945. There were probably more than is in the Navy and all around the world today. That's how stupendous it was. It was wall-to-wall ships. We were tied up in the middle of the bay in all different spots because it was very hard to find accommodations for everybody. But it was a very stirring thing too, especially when the aircraft carriers would come in and they'd be out in the Pacific Ocean, maybe, I don't know, say 25 or 50 miles from San Diego. They would fly the planes off, and each carrier's planes, as they were coming back from the Pacific, they would come over, maybe 100 planes in a formation. I mean, you could hear it coming from a long way away. The drone would build up. It was quite a magnificent sight to see them all, and then, of course, they'd all peel off one by one and land right behind each other. And after a while, because we could clearly see the whole airfield at North Island as we went in and out of the bay, just row on row on row, literally well over 1,000 military aircraft were sitting then on the sides of the Naval Air Station. Again, it shows that war is expensive, and I hope we never see that again. But anyway, it was still quite a sight to behold. And we enjoyed San Diego. We had liberty there. What was always new to me was the fact that that was a real old Navy town. And they had tattoo parlors. Bryce and I think, resisted the tattoos. And but it was a great place. And one thing that I never got over, I don't know whether it's still legal, they had little card rooms. And you could go in and get into a little card game, you know, penny ante card game, play poker. I never did that. I was never any good at it, but I'm sure they took a lot of sailors' money. I don't think you took Bryce's. He's like me. He's a little tight and had a little more sense about him. And but we did enjoy San Diego. The only one other observation is that they had brush fires back then up in the mountains, and Camp Pendleton Marines would help go up and fight the fires. We'd see them from our ship. We were there and went in and out, usually about once a week. We went out for several days to the Channel Islands, where one of them was a Navy firing range called San Clemente Island. Well, I think we probably nailed every goat on San Clemente Island with our rockets and so on. They had all this ammunition, and they figured, well, they might as well shoot it off, I guess, and that's what happened. We go out there and do that. And then I remember in October of 1945, though, we did go up the coast a little for Navy Day to Santa Barbara, California. And at Santa Barbara, the people were very nice, and we were able to go ashore. I remember that's where I visited my first old Spanish mission. And it was very interesting to, you know, see the town. Other things that we did when we were out that way is, I remember once going to a football game at Balboa Stadium. That there used to be an old Pacific Coast Football League. I guess it was pretty good, sort of one of the precursors, if you will, of the National Football League today. So we had a good time. And then, let's see, we were there until about March of 1945 at San Diego. And then we got our orders to take the ship up the west coast, past San Francisco, to the mouth of the Columbia River, which is Astoria, Oregon. Now, at Astoria, Oregon, which was really a fishing town, they had a naval base there where you were mothballing ships, and that's what we had to do. From the time we pulled into Astoria, Oregon, we didn't go to sea again. We simply would help clean up and paint up the equipment, make sure it was in top-notch order, and then they would had like cocoons, white cocoons that they would place over each gun and so on to protect it from the elements and so on. So that's what we were doing, was mothballing. And actually, we did this mothballing for, well, until we were getting out in June of 1945. And that's, of course, where Bryce and I shook hands, and he was going back to his home, and I was going to the East Coast to get discharged and get back to civilian life. But anyway, the only other thing I could say about that was sort of memorable, the Columbia River, of course, is a marvelous river. It was at that time. And as I said to you, that Astoria, Oregon was a fishing town. Well, the fishermen went up to Alaska in the summer. It was very interesting. They would take the small boats and go up to Alaska, but they had a mothership. And so anyway, I guess during the war they had lost their ship to the Navy had requisitioned it, the big mothership. And so they had this new, relatively new ship they just got from the Navy called a Victory ship. And that was their new mothership to, be the cannery ship, I guess, for all the salmon and everything they were going to take up off the coast of Alaska. And it was a darndest thing. Up there, the high schools would let out early. I guess the kids would have to probably go through Christmas vacations and so on, because a lot of the youngsters, I believe they were probably 16 years old and older, they would go with their dads up on the mothership and learn all about it. So it was interesting. We had a nice ride up. I'm sure Bryce will remember it. When we were getting discharged and we were done at Astoria, Oregon, we went up to Portland, Oregon, to where they assembled the troop trains, and everybody went their way. Portland was a nice city, so we enjoyed that very much. The only other thing I can remember about Astoria, Oregon, though, was I had a little problem with one of my hands, and they sent me over to the Naval Hospital for a couple of days when I was in Astoria. And at the Naval Hospital, when I was there, was the famed woman who was blind and deaf, Helen Keller. And she's pretty much a legendary figure. And Helen Keller was there to really show a lot of the sailors who were there and who had serious injuries and disabilities, that they can be overcome. And she certainly, when these men, and some of them had lost a limb and different things like that, but when they saw Helen Keller, they knew, well, hey, if she can do it, maybe I can do it. And I thought that was quite inspirational to see her. Give that grand lady a lot of credit. So anyway, that's about the end of our naval experience. I'm going to next talk in a moment about the visits of Bryce. You made 2 visits to my place in Troy. The first time was in 1964, and the second time was in 1968. And I want to go over them a little bit with you, so I'm just going to take a break at this time. Well, here we are again. I just want to reminisce a slight bit about what was really a lovely, 2 lovely visits. Back in 1964, and I'm not sure that you were the superintendent of schools out in Utah at the time, but anyway, you did have to come east by yourself to an educational conference. And I believe it was in New York City you were going, but that was only 150 miles away from Troy, where we live. And you came up, and that was in the summer of 1964. And I remember I took you to see the State University in Albany, which Governor Rockefeller had just built. And you were amazed because the State University at Albany, which is one of 5 major centers, had about 20,000 students. And of course, in the grand scale that was Nelson Rockefeller, he had the whole campus built at one time. everything was done, everything was in the same style of architecture by, well, an architect by the name of Edward Durrell Stone, who became famous. His first famous building was the United States Embassy in Delhi, India. And after that, he got quite a few commissions, and of course, Rocky, nothing but the best. He built this just 20,000 student university all at once. It was done and built in a period of about 3 or 4 years and occupied. And I don't know if you'll remember that there were fountains and just really a magnificent thing. But I also remember, I tried to show you the upstate area here a little bit, which, believe it or not, is probably a lot like your climate in Utah. We have plenty of snow in the winter, have pleasant summers, and of course up here we have the Adirondack and Catskill Mountains. Everybody thinks of New York as a very crowded state. That is not really true at all. New York City is where 2/3 of the people live, and actually we're very proud to be the 3rd largest dairying state in the country, among other things. And grape and growing and wine making is a big thing, and apples, especially in the Hudson River Valley, it amounts to something. And I remember we took you up to Lake George, and we saw the big, what they call a $1 million beach at Lake George, and that's a lovely lake. Not quite as nice today. I don't think it's since 1964. It's been, I'd say, probably a little overdeveloped, somewhat like Lake Tahoe would be. But nevertheless, I mean, we do have great wilderness areas up there. The Adirondack Park, where you can't hardly do anything, even build a lean-to without permission to make sure you don't spoil the view or the forest. The Adirondack Park is bigger than the entire state of Connecticut. And it's got moose and elk and deer by the thousands and everything else that comes with the wilderness. We're very proud of that. And I remember you had a good time when we went up to Lake George. And so it's a place that we visited with our children over the years here. So then the second time we met Lucy, and that was in 1968. You came east again, and you brought Lucy and the family, and you and Lucy and the kids stayed over with ours, and we had a swell time. Our 5 kids and your children got along fine. There wasn't a peep out of anybody, and it was no inconvenience. I think we both went away with a warm glow that we were trying our best to raise good God-fearing families. I really mean that, and that's to your credit that you did that. My only regret is you always wanted me and Grace to come out there and visit you and Lucy. Well, what happened was I had my own business of printing, and it was one of those things that you couldn't leave too easily. In fact, I always remember I even missed the graduation of one of my children from college because, again, I just had to put business before any family pleasure. But I think the nice part of it was that you'll be glad to know that Grace went into education. She got her master's degree while the children were growing up, and she spent 20 years in the Troy City school system teaching mainly the 4th grade, and she worked hard at it, and I'm very proud of her on that. And I know that anybody like that, when you have a good teacher as a superintendent, I'm sure you prized all your good teachers. And she would have been a good one for you. But that's about the story from here. I am going to next, I have a few snapshots. Reason I have so few is simply because during the war, if you recall, we couldn't have a camera on the ship, at least it was against the rules, and I never had a camera, and I don't think you did. But a couple of guys must have sneaked them on board the ship, and so I do have a couple of snapshots, and I'm going to put them on, and I will describe as best I can the names of the guys, and I even have you in one. Yeah, you look like a regular old salt, as you'll see. So again, I'm going to take a pause at this time. Bryce, now here is a picture of our sister ship, LSMR 504. And I just thought that you'd like to see that picture. And now I'm going to put another one on after a pause. Now here's a picture taken on your first visit to Troy in 1964 when you had attended an educational conference. I'm not sure exactly where it was, but I think it was New York City. Left to right, of course, left is Michael. Michael is my second oldest son now. He lives in stock brokerage down in New York. And there you are, and we both have cans of soda in our hand, if anybody's wondering. It's not beer. And then right behind you, behind your leg, is my littlest one, Matthew. Matthew now has a nice family. He lives in Florida. And then next is the little girl. That's Grace Marie. She's married and lives in Albany. Then next there is Stephen. He's a medical salesman and lives about 10 miles north of here in Clifton Park. In fact, this is Stephen's VCR. And there I am along with you. We still always wore white shirts and ties in those days. So it was a very pleasant day at Lake George, New York. Now another pause. Again, here's pictures of taken in 1945. On the top left, I don't know the fellow's name, but on the top right is Bob Kelly. He was on our ship, and he was from Los Angeles. Bottom left, there I am, good old Ed Bulger. And on the bottom right is Ed Dolan. He was our pharmacist mate from Flushing, Long Island, New York. And so he was the red-headed guy. Maybe you remember him as that. And so behind you in that picture, over Kelly's head, the one, the upper right, is one of the rocket launchers we had. And I always remember the favorite story where you'd leave off a switch and then it looked like we were doing some work repairing it, and I think we looked pretty good to the gunnery officer. I somehow think that's how we got a third-class rating. That was because of your quick thinking. Now there'll be a pause. And here's another picture, and I'm going to go left to right on it. This was probably taken in San Diego. It's, look at the fake palm tree background. From left to right, that's Andy Anderson. He lived in Little Falls, Minnesota. And then there's me with the black hat on. Why I was different than the other three guys, I don't know. But then next is the one I particularly want to mention is Mark Barret. And I think it's Berrett. And he was from Ogden, Utah. And he's the one that I had mentioned earlier that had been here to Troy in 1961, or I mean 1991, and that I visited with. Now, the fella on the far right there is Jack Brooks, and he was from Pittsburgh, California. Now, there'll be another pause. And here is the final picture. I'm just sorry I didn't have more, but this is, I have labeled the Fire Control Gang, San Diego Bay, October 11th, 1945. And left to right, the first guy is Mike Schreckenbach, S-C-H-R-E-C-H-E-N-B-A-C-H. Then there's myself, and then there's L.E. Woodard, W-O-O-D-A-R-D. The next fellow, the good-looking guy, is Bud Jacobs. Next fellow is George Cordell. And, of course, the casual-looking big salt over on the far right is C.B. Draper. And I hope you enjoy it. And if there's any of these that you want, I'll try and have duplicates made for you if you'd like to have them. So take care.